All right, so we're going to talk now about the practice of evangelism. So you see the theology of evangelism, the obstacles to evangelism, and now we're going to talk about the practice of evangelism. We're going to talk now how to witness, and I'm going to give you some skills. This will be the skill part of this, and I want to start off by giving my experience of learning how to do personal evangelism. Kind of a little bit of my testimony in my life. Here's a picture of me in grade 12, my grade 12 grad picture. And they actually had cameras back then, but they weren't colored. So you can tell how long ago this was. And I received a phone call when I was about, month of June, I think it was, from a fellow by the name of Dave Pollard. And Dave was actually director of a Bible camp nearby called Crystal Lake Bible Camp. And he phoned me one afternoon and asked me if I would be willing to be a counselor for a group of 9-year-old boys at this camp. And actually, Dave was on staff at Miller in Pembroke during that time. And one of the things that he did, together with a number of the Millerites, both other staff, and some of the students would come up to the camp, not far from where I grew up. There, it was called Crystal Lake Bible Camp, and the picture here in the bottom is some of the staff there in one of the camps. And then the one on the right, they used to have an old big tent, and they would have their chapel sessions in the big tent like that. And I found some pictures online when I Googled Crystal Lake Bible Camp, and it was interesting to see that. I remember when he asked me, created a little bit of conflict within me, because at that point in time, I was not really living a very committed Christian life. Let me rephrase that, victorious Christian life. I mean, I was a Christian and I was going to church. I was even president of our youth group and involved. But for the previous couple of years, I really wasn't walking as closely to the Lord as I did. God eventually worked in my life, and I'm thankful for that. Actually, at that same point in time, it was most interesting. I had been dating a non-Christian girl who had just broken up with me. And I'm so glad that, that relationship never went any further. And I remember just being absolutely heartbroken. I mean, if you've ever been in I wasn't serious relationship, but I remember sitting there and crying when Beverly said to me that she didn't want to date me anymore. How many of you like country and western music? All right. I came across some recent country and western song titles. So are you ready for this? Here they are. I Still Miss You, Baby, but my aim's getting better. I liked you better before I knew you so well. My John Deere was breaking your field while your dear John was breaking my heart. If drinking don't kill me, her memory will. I'm so miserable without you, it's like having you here. Her teeth was stained, but her heart was pure. I just bought a car from the guy that stole my girl, but the car don't run, so I figure we got an even deal. I got red eyes from your white lies, and I'm blue all the time. If the phone don't ring, baby, you'll know it's me. If you leave me, can I come too? If I had shot you and I wanted to, I'd be out by now. I got tears in my ears from lying on my back in my bed while I cry over you. I like that. When you leave, walk out backwards so I'll think you're walking in. And then the last one. The last word in lonesome is me. Well, that was me back in that point in time. Boy, I'll tell you what, I was heartbroken. And so I threw that in a pathetic attempt at humor. But as a result of his asking me, I'll never forget saying yes to him. Well, I'll tell you what, that was a very crucial moment in my life. And it began, for me personally, a lifelong process of ministry. Involved in that, of course, is leading people to Christ. And I don't remember that first summer in camp. This is a picture I took of some of the kids that I was counseling. They had, you put a little lifesaver in a dish of flour, and then the kids have to, first one to come up with a lifesaver by digging around with your face. You have to put your arms behind the back. First one to come up with it wins the prize. And so that's what they're doing there in camp. And I remember having those 9-year-old boys, and I don't remember all the details, but it was a real joy. And so it was that same fall, and that was really a turning point in my life, that Bible camp experience. And that's when I applied for Miller. I remember taking a class on personal evangelism there at Miller. Actually, I sang in a quartet. There's a picture of me and some of the guys that we called ourselves a Volunteers Quartet. And we had a class on personal evangelism. This was, I think it was my second year, if I'm not mistaken. And actually, I can honestly say I don't remember a single thing out of that class, sadly. Well, I probably do, but I don't remember that. I don't remember what I've forgotten. But for sure, I did learn something out of it. The one thing I do remember is the basic class was, I had to memorize 100 verses that they gave us from the Bible. And for the final exam, it was 25 verses were put on by reference only, and you had to write them out. You were allowed 4 mistakes per verse. So therefore, if you had 23 right and 2 wrong, you would get 92%. That was the way that was done. But all of that led for me to get involved in ministry. I talked about this earlier on, being involved in work. I told the story of working in Child Evangelism Fellowship, backyard Bible clubs in Saskatchewan. This was when I was in Wadena, Saskatchewan. I was thinking back this week, back to an amazing experience in my life. That was summer in Saskatchewan. And I remember going to Indian Head, and it was a United Church that had opened their community up, and I stayed with the United Church minister. We got to be quite an evangelical. The community of Indian Head was just, the kids there, they had no experience and nothing about the gospel, no Sunday school, nothing. And I went from door to door inviting kids to come out, and I had my Bible clubs with the kids. I'll never forget, I think it was the Friday afternoon, my final club, but always during the time, one of the places we had the Bible club that they set up was the local baseball diamond. And they had bleachers there, and I was to go to the ball diamond, and the kids were to sit on the bleachers, and I was to teach them. I remember that there was, that final day, there was 50 kids sitting in those bleachers as I was teaching them about Jesus, presenting the plan of salvation. And I don't know, I never kept track during that summer. Dozens and dozens of kids came to know the Lord. Someday I hope to see some of them in heaven. Whatever's happened from those kids' lives and their since, I have no idea. So when I graduated from Miller, I went to Winnipeg Bible College. I got my Bachelor of Theology degree there. And that's when I got involved in the church in Stonewall. See the sign there that one of the guys in the church made? Stonewall Baptist Church, and my name, and Sunday School 10, worship service 11, Bible study 8 p.m. Thursday. Come worship with us. And at that point in time in my life, I had very little idea how to lead a person to Christ. I remember thinking, I've led kids to Christ in CF clubs and as a Bible camp counselor, a VBS teacher, but I've never led anybody to the Lord as a pastor or working with adults. And I remember shortly into my new career there, I got involved in personal evangelism. There's a picture of me having a Bible study with a non-Christian couple, Stan and Sharon here. I remember thinking, man, how I'd like to bring them to Christ, but I had no idea how to do it. That was my experience. For me, the struggle was how to present the plan of salvation to people. I remember I would typically, in my presentation, I would wander all over the place, which really was a struggle for me with my linear sequential way of thinking in my mind. And I was always kind of a source of uncertainty. I didn't know how to present the gospel to people. And so one day, I remember very clearly being really frustrated. Like, I'm recommending to people to accept Christ, but nobody's getting saved. And I'm talking about, adults primarily here. And I prayed and I said, Lord, I really, really need help in witnessing. And I need it fast. And it was amazing that at that point in time, I came across a book. As a matter of fact, I still have it in my library. This is Soul Winning Made Easy. Remember we talked about soul winning? He who wins souls is wise, Proverbs 29:11. I remember reading it and thinking, oh, that's not true. And then actually Soul Winning Classes Made Easy. I also had that one. And I remember reading this, and through God's guiding and directing, it helped me forge a plan of salvation that I use to this day. Actually, next week, I'm going to get into how to present the gospel to a person. And I'm going to go through that, the actual the plan of salvation. I got some ideas how I want to do it. I'm praying about that, but that'll be next week. And so as a result, I'm happy to say over the last 50 years, I've had the joy of leading many people to Christ. Just recently, I got a text from my nephew, and my nephew was working at Union Gospel Mission, just down the street here, on staff there. His name is Tim Harris, and Tim sent me a text, and he said, Uncle Henry, had a guy come to the mission, and he said, I had a conversation with him, and he said, I asked him, have you ever accepted Jesus Christ as Savior? And he said, yes. He said, many years ago in a church in Stonewall by a pastor, Henry Ozerny. Well, Tim then told me the guy's name. His name was Joe Richards. Then I thought back, wow, I remember Joe Richards. He had been a foster child who had come in, lived in one of the foster homes in the church families, and had come to the youth group. How and when he got saved, I don't remember. But I thought it was so gratifying. I mean, you were looking at probably, when Tim told me this, that was 50 years ago. So this guy would probably be about 65 now, because he was about 15 when he came to our church. Of course, through the years, God used me in Stonewall to lead many people to Christ. Some of these people are already in heaven there around the throne. And I've had the funerals for a lot of these people that have personally led to the Lord. And so here's my goal. My goal is for you similarly to be a witness. That's what I hope as a result of this class, and that you can experience. I'll tell you what, there is no greater high, but it's up there than seeing somebody accept Christ. I remember one time I led a person to the Lord, and I got into my car, drove home. I remember thinking, man, this is as good as it gets. The feeling of almost euphoria of leading Christ. And to know that you had a part in a person's salvation. When you watch people just so thrilled and excited. And so my goal is to encourage you that if you're not being a witness, to get serious with God about doing what God wants most done, bringing people today who are non-worshipers of Christ so that they too can fulfill their God-given purpose in life. So that's ultimately what I'm hoping will happen as a result of this section, the practice of evangelism. So what we're going to talk about is how we can witness to others. This is that cartoon I mentioned earlier on. It's actually the front page of a book I bought a long time ago called Tell It Like It Is, a book on evangelism that I had, and what you don't want to be in evangelism there for sure. So we're going to move on to the next point, and that is starting a conversation. So I remember earlier on in one of the classes, somebody mentioned that always a challenge. How do you start a conversation when you're witnessing to people? And that is a great challenge that a lot of people have as to how to best start that conversation. Again, the picture here, the cartoon I came across somewhere, is that is probably not the best way to do it. I don't recommend that system at all. And so we want to look at what is the best way. What do you say? How do you start a conversation talking to someone about Jesus? Perhaps you heard about the fellow who was a barber, and he was a Christian barber, and he wanted to witness to his customers, but he didn't know how to start the conversation. So one day we had a guy sitting in the chair. He had him all wrapped up in the barber shop there. As he was prepping, he thought, how can I start it? And he was giving the guy a shave, and he had the knife, and he was sharpening it. And as he was sharpening it with his strop, he got a brilliant idea. He said, you know what, I'm going to encourage him to prepare for the inevitability of death. And so as he was feeling the edge of the razor with his thumb, he turned around and asked the man, are you ready to die? Well, I wouldn't recommend that way of starting conversations, because needless to say, not only did it lose him both as a future prospect for the kingdom of God, but also as a future customer. So that's not the way. Of course, you want to encourage people to prepare for death, and it's not a good way to share your faith. And so we want to look this morning at some ways of starting a conversation when you want to talk to others about Jesus. About a month ago, maybe longer ago, just before Christmas, I got an email from a Christian ministry called Hope Explored. It came into my mailbox, and I opened it up, and they were announcing a brand new series called Hope Explored. And it said in their promotional material, one of the easiest ways to introduce someone to Jesus and the Christian faith. And I thought, wow, this is exactly what I'm teaching about in the college class. And so I read it, and here is what they said. Sometimes in Scripture, coming to faith is described as waking up. In the past 2 years, and he's writing this in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of people have woken up to the reality of death. It's now become much more acceptable to ask our friends, do you think about spiritual things? So that's how he's suggesting, and this whole purpose of this ministry, this program, is how to present the gospel and how to get conversations going. So he goes on to say, if you ask people what they think the purpose of life is, they might go, oh, that's a bit much. But if you say, well, I think we've all felt that with the pandemic, when so much of the superficial stuff that gave us meaning was taken from us, a part of us asked, what is life really about? We can be bold in saying something like, my Christian faith has meant so much to me. I have to say in the pandemic, I don't know what I've done without it. That's hope in the face of death. Would you like to learn more about it? So that's what they suggest. taking the current problem with the coronavirus pandemic and using that as an into it. As a matter of fact, using this methodology, you could even move into the current war with Russia and Ukraine, and I have used that quite a bit, and I've talked to people about that, and especially when you hear in the news that Putin has his finger on the nuclear bombs. I don't know if I told you this last week, but I'll say it again. I told my people in my church, Putin may have his finger on the nuclear bomb, but God has his hand on Putin's finger. So don't have fear about that. But a lot of people are afraid of that. Well, this is the recommendation here. He suggests that if you start off the conversation, what is the purpose of life? That's a bit much. As a matter of fact, that's the way I started this presentation to you back in the first one, was that the purpose of life, and that's how you witness to people. I find with younger people that probably works better than maybe with older people, because for them, especially kids your age, as they are looking at life, what's it all about? It's interesting to watch people, and it's interesting, people really search that question probably until about their late 30s, early 40s. And then it's interesting to watch. During that period of time, they become aware. Remember I talked about that emptiness inside. They become aware of that emptiness inside of them at about probably early 20s, maybe late teens, early 20s. And they think, well, maybe this will work, maybe this will work, maybe this will work. And then probably about the mid-30s, they come to the conclusion, well, I've tried this, I've tried this, tried this, I've tried this, nothing works. And they were very open to the presentation of the gospel at that point in their life. If you wait much longer, past the 50s, age 50 and into the 60s, by that time, people kind of come to terms with life and they almost give up. And they say, well, I'm not going to reach my goals. And they kind of settle for secondary things. It's interesting, the easiest people to witness to are those people who are looking for something in their life. Very difficult to witness to old people, I'll tell you that. I speak in nursing homes, often, seniors complexes, and I say to people, I'm your age now, and I said, I realize you guys, most of us have got one foot in the grave, and I said, back in high school, when I was in grade 12, I remember I'd spend the whole night cramming for my final exam, and I said, if you've not dealt with your relationship with God, you should be cramming for the finals. You're going to stand before God in a little while. And it's interesting to see how older people are resistant to the gospel. It's probably the saddest thing to watch. People my age, who just kind of, once they've made that decision, of course, they become strong believers, but it's just an interesting thing. Anyways, what this man is saying, that he suggests going to current events, such as the present-day pandemic. Both, I think, are ways of getting the conversation going. So, the first thing I want to say, when it comes to starting a conversation, where you start the starting of the conversation is by praying and asking God how to proceed. And so oftentimes, here's the way I do it. When I'm encountering somebody and the conversation is going, I'm already praying, Lord, how do you want me to get this conversation going? The obvious reason for praying that is because I know that God knows this person inside and out, and he knows what step of starting the conversation will work best. And so that's why I pray and ask God to give me guidance and direction in this regard. And it's an amazing thing. I will have all of a sudden this idea pop into my head, and I will start sharing that. Sometimes I've witnessed to people, and I've said things that I didn't know I knew. I remember one time I witnessed to a person, I started a conversation and witnessed to a person. I remember thinking afterwards, man, I should write that down because I'll forget it. I hadn't known I knew it. And it was like, remember that verse Jesus said when you're arrested and taken before the authorities, don't worry about what you're going to say because the word will be given you what to say. And I found that's the same thing. It's like, once I commit myself to witnessing, it's like, man, bang, 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 these ideas. I'm struggling as to which idea to use, which one not to use. Like, my mind is flooded with ideas. God responds. Good illustration of this is in the Old Testament story of Abraham, who sends his servant to get a wife for his son Isaac. I'm not sure, John, how you'd feel if your mom and dad sent the hired man to get a future wife for you. You're not married yet, are you? You're not married? Okay. How would you feel if your mom and dad sent a hired man to get a wife for you and come back and you'd have to marry her?
I'd have to talk with the hired man. some harsh guidelines.
I'm not sure what Isaac, maybe he had a couple of visits with the servant before. Like, I would have thought Abraham would have sent Isaac along with the servant, maybe Isaac would have had a chance. Oh, yeah, I like her, but I don't like her. I don't know. Anyways, so the servant gets to Padan Aram, which is where Abraham's uncle Laban is living, and he sits by the well and he prays, "O Lord God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day. Show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, here I stand by the well of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your pitcher that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I'll also give your camels a drink," which is a heavy expectation. They said the job I think he had 10 camels, and you know how much a camel can drink? She was committing herself to pumping that pump. Well, actually, in those days, they would pull it up by the bell. That was a big job. And she says, drink, and I also give your camels a drink. Let her be the one you have appointed for my servant Isaac. It's kind of like setting the fleece here, eh? And by this I will know you've shown kindness to my master. And so at that very moment, along comes Rebekah, and that's exactly what she does. And he asks her, what is your name? Where do you live? And she says, my name is Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel. My grandpa is Nahor. And that they could stay at their place. And when the servant heard that, he praised God. And this is Genesis 24:27. Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not left destitute my master of his mercy and his truth. I being in the way, the Lord led me to the house of my master's brethren. And so that's the point which I say, as you begin seeking to find a conversation starter, pray and let God guide you. And sometimes I've told him, Lord, if you want me to witness to this person, have them say something of a spiritual nature. I'll talk about this a little later on. Not everybody is ready to accept Christ, and that's where you have to be careful. You don't want to pull green fruit off the tree. And people are all on a spiritual journey. We'll talk about that later as well. And some people are very ready to accept Christ. Others are still not ready. So I want to talk about some lessons that I learned in an evangelism class that I taught in the church in Stonewall. Back in the early 2000s in Stonewall, here's a picture of some of our congregation. I think we had outdoor service that Sunday. We started a series of 4 classes a week that we called classes 101 to 401. And everybody that was new in the life of the church, we took them through that class. And I think over the 14, 15 years we did this, close to 300 people, we took through this 4 steps that we got from Rick Warren and Saddleback in his book called The Purpose-Driven Church. And we taught class 101, which was committed to membership, class 201, committed to maturity, class 301, committed to ministry, and class 401, committed to mission. And we did our purpose statement of our church along those 4 steps. And this was our purpose statement: to magnify God's name by bringing people to Jesus and membership in his family, which was what we taught in class 101. Developing them to Christ-like maturity, that was class 201. Equipping them for ministry in the church, class 301. And life mission in the world, class 401. And so class 401 was the course we taught on evangelism, how to share our faith. And we called it Loving People Through Evangelism. And it was my associate pastor, one of the pastors and staff there, John and Harrison, and I taught this class. Well, in 401, we focused on outreach and evangelism. And we shared some ideas how to start the conversation. So here's some practical ideas. Number 1, listen for problems and needs that people talk about that you have had experience God has helped you with. And so sometimes as you're talking with somebody, and I'm going to use this quite a bit, people will say, I've got a problem in my life. For example, I've had people say, guys say to me, I struggle with pornography. A lot of teenage boys in our church in Stonewall come to me and talk to me about pornography. Well, when I was a teenager, I struggled with pornography as well. And it's the opportunity that I have to use that as a point of contact. So whatever the thing that if people do open up in your conversation and share a problem, and you think, God's helped me with that, there's a wonderful way to open up, and they will open up the conversation, and they will think if it worked for him, it may work for me. A lot of times we've had women in our church struggling with eating disorders, bulimia, and such. And I had some of the women in our church who won victory over that tell me that God has used them to share with these people. what you go through in life, God then later on uses what you learn out of that experience, painful as it may be, to help other people. That way you are connecting with them on a deep level, creating an interest or even a curiosity in them. So that's the first way. Listen to what some of the things they say. Secondly, you can begin a conversation by referring to something you've heard in the news or something current on TV which deals with a common need or problem. For example, right now, I mean, there's a lot of programs, a lot of reports on TV. I was watching the other day about a survey on Canadians' mental health and how many people are stressed after 2 years of the pandemic. That's a fantastic opportunity to witness to people. People are stressed out and especially as it's carried on, although hopefully we're turned a corner. And so you can say something like this. Did you hear about the recent study that says 46% of Canadians are experiencing anxiety and worry due to COVID-19? I can surely identify with that and how people feel. It wasn't that long ago I struggled in that area too, but something happened that changed everything in my life. As a matter of fact, this is the same thing that John Keeble in that Christianity Explored Ministries of Canada was recommending concerning the pandemic. And I hopefully you don't have anxiety about the pandemic. I don't. And I share with people the peace and the confidence God has given to me, and I use that as a starting point. This is what God's done in my life in that way. Actually, over the years, I've had lots of Jehovah's Witnesses come to my house and try to convert me to Jehovah's Witness teaching. I could tell you the story. Back in 1973, shortly after Lynn and I were married, whoa, that's a long time ago. There was a knock at the door, and 2 Jehovah's Witnesses came to the door, and they started talking with me. And I said, what? And I pretended I didn't know anything about the Bible and the rest of that. And I said, so what is this all about? You know, what do you believe about Jesus? Well, you know, they said he is the firstborn of God's creation, and I said, oh, I see. And where's this based on? It's in the Bible. I said, oh, you know what? I took Greek in college, and of course I had. And I said, I'll go get my Greek Bible. So I turned the Bible and I went to John 1:1. And NRK kain halagos, you know, and the rest of that. I read it in Greek. So I translated it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And they said, no, its Word was a God. If you know the Jehovah's Witness teaching, they don't believe Jesus is God, that he is a God, one of many. And I said, no, it says here, and when you translate it, Colwell's rule says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They said, no, that's not true. I said, okay. So I said, you read it. I gave it upside down. I wouldn't do anything like that now, but I was only 22, so. And I gave it to them, and they look at it. Of course, they couldn't read it. And I said, I got to be fair. I said, I'm a pastor. I just finished, Bible college. I started the church, and I presented the plan of salvation to them. Well, when the Jehovah's Witnesses come to the door, they oftentimes would use this process. All through the years, a number of times, they would talk about nuclear war, which is very interesting. Nowadays, nuclear war has become another concerning topic, as we've said. And so one of the things I think is we can take a page out of their playbook and use it to present the claims of Christ. So in 401, we stated, start a statement that they'd agree with in a situation they can relate to. For example, it seems that life is getting faster and faster. Well, who can't agree with that? This was what we said in 401. Sometimes life gets so complicated, or life doesn't always turn out the way we planned for it or expected it. And everybody experiences those kinds of things in life. So you use that as a starting point in their lives. Also, we mentioned that in the issue of trying to witness to people that you've known for a long time, but you've never taken the time or had the courage to share Christ with. And especially once you realize, man, I should be witnessing these people. And it's somebody I've worked with for 5 years, or maybe I went to school with, and you've never witnessed to them. Here's how you start a conversation with them. Begin with an apology. And like I have here in the PowerPoint, the girl saying to her friend, Sally, I'm really sorry, but I have never told you about the most important thing in my life. And we're going to talk a little bit later on after lunch about the whole idea of telling your story and how you do that. So that's where we will go. The second step is asking pertinent questions. And the question is, I'm going to ask the very pertinent. Jordan, is lunch served?
It's about there, yeah.
Can I take a couple of minutes more, or nah? I'm tired. All right. Yeah.
Give you one more minute.
I'm tired. I need a break. And so do these poor kids.
Thank you very much.
Okay, praise the Lord.
Really